All right, we'll get going tonight. Thanks everyone for joining us. I hope that everyone had a uh, good Thanksgiving and a good break for our students over the last week, and that remote learning is going well for them as we've started back up um, this week and now into our already fourth day of our first week, so almost a third of the way through before the holidays and another break. But also wanted to let you know first that we appreciate you submitting questions ahead of time. We've certainly tailored the presentation tonight to answer some of those. Many of the ones around the guidelines on how sort of we came to the decision that we did, looking at adjusting the schedule for the resumption of classes and looking at the remainder of the spring semester. So I'll share some of that with you. There was also a number of questions about, are we looking at other schools and what they're doing, and is this similar? And so I've added that information to tonight's presentation. The other theme was around athletics, and I've asked Jennifer Viana, our Director of Athletics, to be here for Q&A after, and certainly we'll start that off in person during the Q&A once I'm done with the presentation. To answer some of those questions. And then also after the presentation, Raja Bala, Director of Academic Affairs, will join us to answer any questions you have about academics, the Winterim, what the remainder of the school year will look like, and then also Josh Doyon, Director of Student Affairs, to answer any questions about student life, residential life, anything related in those areas as we progress, and they'll join us in the question and answer as well. So I do want to welcome everyone, and we'll have them join us after the presentation part. But as we get going tonight, of course, we're now back to bringing the penguins home. If you were part of our webinars previously, we were in the fall anyway, keeping our penguins home. We've done over a dozen of these since the pandemic has started, and since we've formed the task force, and even before that, and certainly after that with smaller groups, but over a dozen with our general parent community. So I think this sort of cadence of communication works really well, where we'll, sort of let you know when a communication is coming, do that in writing, have a follow-up webinar with question and answer, give you some time to think about the communication, form your questions. We'll do our best to answer that certainly in the presentation, and then bring on guests to help give you the most current information. One of the frustrating things about COVID-19 and the pandemic as it relates to boarding school, particularly Cushing Academy, is that we don't have a lot of answers with certainty. Questions about what is the plan for X have a lot of open-ended answers. There's a plan for X if Y happens, or if Z happens, or who knows, if something else happens, we have to adjust it in a different direction. And so it's really difficult to give answers with certainty, because certainly we know you're looking for an answer to be able to plan and to know what the future will look like. And, on one aspect, we don't want to make a promise or certainly give an answer that we won't be able to live up to, given the changing landscape of the pandemic and what that means for us, especially with governing state and local institutions. But certainly continue to do our best to give you the up-to-date answers we have, and to be as transparent as we can. As I usually do, I wanted to give a pandemic update, and this slide is not from today, a little disclaimer there. This is actually, you see in the upper right-hand corner, from June 24th. And the significance of this is this was 56 days before we onboarded in the fall semester. So if you remember, we came back to school August 19th and 20th. So this is 56 days, I think, prior to August 19th. And so you can see newly reported cases, right, was 172. Things were heading in the right direction. I did a webinar right before this and reported some numbers. It was actually probably the low point of what we saw for numbers. And so just to give you a little perspective, this is today. And today's number is one of the highs, if not the high, and it does include 680 cases that were not part of today's number, but were not previously reported. If you go to today's report on the state website, there is a little disclaimer that says that. So if you want to call it 5,800, we can, but certainly significantly increased from what we saw even a few weeks ago, but certainly in the summer. And the significance of 56 days is we are 56 days away from onboarding on January 28th in the winter. So that sort of gives some context to our conversation. Now, what drives that is the new report, which the old one didn't have. On the right-hand side does show age ranges. and those are broken down by 10 years except 0 to 19. So it doesn't give you an exact apples to apples comparison. It's a little apples to oranges, especially with that younger age group lumping in 20 years compared to 10 years. But you'll see the growth, at least since this week, since the numbers have really escalated, have been in that 0 to 19, 20 to 29, and also in the 40 to 49 age range. So just something, another piece of information as we collect data and continue to make decisions to be aware of. Here's the comparison Wednesday, June 24th. You can see where that was trending. Certainly in May, when we had really high 7-day weighted average positive testing, and how that continued down, and all the rest of the metrics here that were reported. And now it's a little bit different on the way it's reported, but certainly you can see what the theme means and what the trends are, is that this is coming up. And so just as we think about how we're going to onboard and at least begin the semester together, this certainly frames that conversation for us. It gives us some data points, and with what our medical team has been telling us since the beginning about how this would react, I do have to say they've been right on the dot in terms of saying that we would have a lull in the summer and that things would pick up in the fall, and that around the coming into winter and into the holidays we would have sort of a surge. All of those things have sort of come to fruition, but at the same time they are saying at the end of January is when we'll be in a better place than we are now. At least that's what they're thinking. So that also sort of is another data point as we look towards how we're going to re-enter and why we chose to re-enter when we did. This is from the Boston Globe today. Feel free to check out the Globe. There's an article. So I think it says 5 graphics to show why the pandemic is serious or something like that. That's not the exact title, but you should be able to find it sort of with that that title. That's probably close enough for a Google search. And you can see since October 4th, COVID hospitalizations in New England, Massachusetts, and Connecticut at the top there. So even in the short period of time since October 4th, how we've seen rates increase. And so that's when we were just in probably week 5 or 6 of the fall semester. And knew that, since pretty much we onboarded right at a low time, and in that third week of September after Labor Day, cases started to tick back up, hospitalizations started to tick back up, and we saw that trend continue right up until today, and is still continuing. Hopefully it goes the other way, but this is what right from today's Globe. And here's total hospitalizations, and you can see certainly not as many as we had in the spring. But in the fall here, we have not even half of what we had in the spring. But again, that is sharply beginning to increase. So hopefully it doesn't increase at the rate that it did back, as you can see there in the beginning of April. But again, something we're continuing to watch as we progress through the remainder of the school year. And that sort of leads me, I did want to touch upon the dimmer switch of operations, and it still is on our website. And I encourage you to take a look at that as we move through the year. But one of the things in the fall that I think there was perhaps a misunderstanding, and I'll certainly take some credit for that, is that there was an expectation that the dimmer switch would move, and we really set the dimmer switch out with the hope that it would move, and that the pandemic or the state of the pandemic would continue to decline as it had in the summer. As you see that slide I showed from June with the trends going in the right direction of decreasing cases and hospitalizations and death and all the rest of the markers that we look at. And in fact, it happened the other way. We sort of came in right at the right time. I think, the sweet spot at the end of August before the Labor Day holiday, and then cases did continue to tick up, which we were watching. And, although we didn't have any on campus, which was great, and we were able to stay that way through the remainder of the semester, the public health situation continued to deteriorate, which is why we didn't move that. And certainly we weren't alone. And I'll get into sort of how some of the other schools around us responded. But, in talking to our peer boarding schools in Massachusetts, our response was right in line with everyone else's. Now, certainly other states have different requirements. For example, Massachusetts, and when we talk about athletics, didn't allow football statewide, and New Hampshire did. And so, the boarding schools there were able to do some things that boarding schools here didn't. And we are just 5 miles or so from the New Hampshire line, but in Massachusetts, so I have to abide by those Massachusetts rules. We still continue to meet with our planning committees. The year is far from over. I think we've just probably finish the beginning portion of the school year. So as we're beginning the middle section of our academic year together, our student experience committee and campus operations, business continuity, health, wellness, communications, and also our Winterim committees continue to meet and plan. We're excited for the Winterim and the seminars that are coming up in January and February. I think that's a real value added component to the student experience this year. But we're starting to focus back on repopulation, what that's going to look like, residential life. We had talked about calendar previously. Health services, if you remember, that was a brand new team that started in the summer, so they're having a chance to regroup and plan with us as well. So still lots of work happening here on campus, even though what students experience at boarding schools around the country. And certainly in Massachusetts, as we look at, and I talk to other heads of schools and we talk to our colleagues across boarding schools, dining is very similar, sports are very similar, the classroom experience very similar, how living and learning happened on campus. We were certainly fortunate to have the ability to have singles, as we approach the year, and certainly that's something we'll continue to evaluate as we approach the spring semester. But all of those components were small pieces when layered upon each other, were able to get us through the fall semester. And we did offer all of our students who were on campus the opportunity, offer their families the opportunity to talk with me, to talk with our associate head of school, Catherine Pollack, to get garner feedback about that experience, what worked, what didn't, what you liked, what you didn't like. And we certainly know it wasn't, the student experience that we were able to offer, when the pandemic wasn't a part of our everyday life. And that was definitely a part of what informed our thinking for moving forward over the course of the next portion of the school year. So I just want to review our previous plan, which we rolled out in the summertime. If you remember, we started the school year a couple of weeks early. We onboarded students about 2.5 weeks earlier than we normally did or would have planned to do if it were not for COVID-19. And started classes about 2 weeks earlier than we normally would have, and certainly got in a 13-week straight fall semester experience. As you know, we've begun our Winterim and still plan to do that. And then we're going to do a spring break, and had considered, okay, spring semester March 8th, maybe we onboard in January, maybe we do it in March, what does that look like, and then continue with a commencement in June. And that really gave us a longer school year. It gave us 36 weeks to sort of play with and be flexible with, as opposed to the 30 or 32 that we normally would have during a school year, because we knew that a lot of things would be out of our control: government regulations, state mandates, local Department of Health guidelines. We didn't know if different counties would act in certain ways, if boarding schools would be treated a little bit differently, such as colleges, because they're congregate living environments. So there's a lot of unknown going into the school year about, what we would be able to do or not be able to do. And so we wanted to give ourselves, and as I've said it before on webinars, maximum flexibility to be able to deliver an in-person experience for as many days and weeks as possible. And if you remember, sort of just to revisit our considerations, and there's a theme of questions around this comparing to why we've adjusted and moved forward. So did want to revisit that. We wanted to avoid the flu season. Our medical team, as we were talking with management and members of the board, thinking about, if someone has COVID-19 symptoms, it could be confused with the flu. Is it possible, and we didn't know at the time, for sort of a dual pandemic, for someone to be compromised in one way or another if they had the flu or COVID, and could those things coexist? And certainly we also thought, well, this would be the definitely safest alternative if those were concerns, as cases were predicted and have indeed spiked in the winter. So that would allow us to be remote during that time. The other thing is, schools some of our peer schools were only releasing fall-only schedules, and we were one of the earlier side schools, especially among the schools that we sort of compete with or are peers with in Massachusetts. Because certainly one thing COVID has done is it's restricted our window and able to compare ourselves with other schools to those in Massachusetts, just because states have treated schools so differently in sports and other things. Higher ed, which sometimes fall to restrictions for us, especially in dorms, differently. So, we had to look only at those schools in Massachusetts, and those maybe we wouldn't normally consider, competitors or peers, but certainly in this case wanted to be sure that we were able to learn from each other and be able to proceed in the healthiest and safest way possible. And a lot of that information wasn't available as we were planning in the summer. And also a lot of unknowns just about how boarding schools would operate. Would it be that we'd have several cases a week and it wouldn't be manageable? Would it be that we'd have several faculty and adults out at one time? We felt like we had plans in place to keep the community safe, which ultimately proved to be true. But at the same time, it was an unknown, and our medical team advised that, the structure and processes we had were likely to create a positive outcome, but at the same time, again, wanted to give ourselves maximum flexibility to be able to offer the best experience possible. But because of all of that, what we came out with in July, although gave us maximum flexibility, it also gave us a little bit of leeway to adjust, to use some of that flexibility as the period of the school year went forward. And really what we're trying to do is preserve enrollment, build a bridge, preserve the school community, all of our great programs, our sports, to the other side of the COVID pandemic. And so that was another part of our consideration, is how do we be able to do that in a safe way for everyone in the community. But at the end of the day, similar to now, almost every part of the future is unknown. So just thinking about, as we compare, that process that we had in July to the process that we have now, and looking at, okay, well, the calendars of our competitor schools are pretty widely available, and the data of how boarding schools have lived through COVID is also available, anecdotally through our relationships with our peers who work at other places, also with dashboards that schools have. The school websites are very informative, similar to the Keep Cushing Healthy page. Many schools have a similar type of page where they're sharing information, so you can also, come together with some operational themes of how congregate boarding schools are handling COVID-19. Cushing is one of only 2 boarding schools in Massachusetts that are over 90% boarding, so we are sort of more of a congregate living environment than, say, those who have many day students coming to their campus every day. But there are 9 schools over 75% boarding. So when looking at how schools are looking at the pandemic, that was one slice of data that we wanted to be sure that we examined. We also have feedback, as I said, lots of Zoom calls, emails, phone calls as well, about the experience, parent experience, student experience, what was going well, what wasn't going well, what was difficult, and certainly feedback from faculty on the same level. Since then, Massachusetts has prioritized in-person learning. The American Academy of Pediatrics has also said that they prioritize in-person learning, so that also informs our decisions moving forward. And cases are climbing at high levels. Hospitalizations are increasing, as I did show. Death rates do remain low. They have increased, but certainly not at the rate that cases or hospitalizations are. At the beginning of November, average age of COVID death in Massachusetts, at least, was about 80 years old. So the risk is better known. It's better understood. Certainly, governments and agencies, I would say, are a little more risk tolerant. As you can see, we didn't have this many cases in the spring, but we did have, mass shutdowns and a lot of sort of quick movement to go from being almost fully open to not. And now there's a willingness to sort of dial things slowly back and forth. New Jersey and Arizona today announced some drawbacks, particularly on the sports side. Boston University today on the hockey front, shut things down. So, but at the same time, there is lights at the end of the tunnel for those actions, where, similar to rink closures in Massachusetts, it was a 2-week period and they came back. And you see that in other movements and sort of milestones as well for different activities across states. So, as treatments get better, as risk is better known, as governments become increasingly sort of comfortable with moving sort of in smaller ticks as opposed to those large measures, I think we as a society do as well. So modified, which I shared, I won't spend too much time on, shared in the communication on Monday that you all received, and certainly it has our fall there. But when we look at sort of starting with the spring, Cushing Winterim will resume January 6th. We shrunk that down just to start on that Wednesday and have 3 weeks after the holidays, just like the 3 weeks before. Have a Thursday, Friday period to onboard, just as we did in the summer. So if you remember, I believe it was August 20th, 21st, somewhere in there on that Thursday, Friday, we onboarded everybody back to campus. We're looking at January 28th, 29th in a similar fashion, which we will communicate in the next few weeks. Onboarding back to campus again, testing, which certainly the results are just coming so much faster. We've heard pretty loud and clear consistently from a majority of families. It's just that 13-week stretch was difficult, really tough to be on campus for that long of a period of time. Usually, right, boarding schools every 5-6 weeks, you have a long weekend, you have the opportunity to go home, right, every couple of weekends. Not for everyone, but certainly even if you can't go home, you have that opportunity to get off campus with an activity. Maybe you go with a friend. There's ways to sort of break up that period of time in chunks. And certainly one of the challenges without being able to get off campus, go home, or have those long weekends like we do after a family weekend or at the beginning of October, or that we do normally in February, right? These little breaks, is that 13 weeks became just really long. And it really became clear that we needed to try to break that up and take that feedback and incorporate it into our planning for the spring. So you can see what we did was we took the 14-week in-person experience and wanted to preserve that, but broke it into 2 7-week chunks, which start on that February 1st, goes until March 19th. Have 2 weeks, although a little bit less since we'd onboard again on a Thursday, Friday, and then come back for another 7-week stretch beginning on April 5th. So this is on our Keeping Cushing Healthy page. You can see all the dates there. It's in the letter shared on Monday. Certainly let us know if that's part of your question, and we'll try to answer that tonight. I did want to compare, there was another question about, what are other boarding schools in Massachusetts doing? So, we do look at that. We do have conversations, as I said, both looking at websites and then talking to leadership at other schools. Certainly COVID has brought, I would say, definitely state by state boarding schools closer together, the New Hampshire schools, Massachusetts schools. So just giving you a sort of slice of some of the schools and what they're doing, NMH, Lawrence Academy, right? Starting schools at different times. We started August 24th. You have a 31st and September 9th there. NMH does have most of their kids on campus right through. They stayed through the Thanksgiving holiday, actually, and are there right until the 17th. They're the only school that I know of that did it that way. Winter classes resuming remotely, as you can see there, and a phased return beginning on January 20th. They're not having a spring break, so going right through and doing graduation on May 16th. And so I won't spend too much time on each one, but just to give you a sense and a flavor of another data point that's informed our decision making. Lawrence Academy, on-campus learning, they started a little bit later than most, as you'll see when we go through this. September 9th, certainly again, remote classes in December, similar to what we're doing. Their dorms open the 10th of January. On-campus classes begin shortly thereafter. They do have a spring break and a graduation on June 4th. And I did think, even though there's news CDC reducing quarantine times, really beginning, anytime before the 10th or even the 14th when we were looking at a 2-week quarantine, and what that means would be difficult because we don't want to ask folks to quarantine over the holidays. I mean, we certainly want to encourage, limiting social bubbles as much as possible anytime. But also we want to be realistic with what we think folks will comply with, and want to make sure that we are creating a schedule that not only promotes sort of maximum compliance, but also is realistic with expectations of all of our families. I'll go through a couple more of these. Just there's not too many, but just schools you're familiar with. Schools we play athletically: Worcester Academy, 9-2 in person, January 12th. And of course, these are all subject to change. We did this with our faculty a little more than a week ago. And when I went through it in the last couple of days, it's changed. Some of these have changed since. So I'm sure they will continue to change and evolve. And that's the hard part about sort of giving answers, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, is that with the evolving nature of the pandemic and what happens, I would imagine plans at all schools will continue to evolve. We tried to come up with something that we could depend on, something that was realistic, that followed the advice of our medical team and where they think the infection rates will be going at that time. But as you can see here, on-campus learning, similar start times, both remote, in-person classes starting at similar times, right? Both having a spring break, pretty similar times. Wilbraham's graduation is the same as our new graduation date, but other than that, you can see a trend there. Deerfield and Berkshire, right, on-campus learning for Deerfield was pretty late. So that was our week 3. September 14th, fall term ends same day as ours. They're doing a D term, which is, I would call similar to our Winterim, which is remote in December. Beginning remote classes the 4th, on-campus arrival January 10th, spring break, graduation. So again, Berkshire, they started very late, September 28th. I don't know if they left on the 20th or not. You can see remote December, so I'm assuming so. Virtual learning at the beginning of January, on-campus classes resume, again, a spring break. Since this was a theme for the questions, I did want to pick a few of these and go through Brooks School. Again, you can see the start date, right? Again, very similar. They're doing virtual final exams, so not going all the way through to the 18th of December. Another sort of winter term, virtual till the 23rd, on-campus classes, a little more than a month there. And then looks like spring break is beginning February 27th, sort of with a staggered exit. It looks like maybe there's a sort of virtual week or hybrid week before the formal spring break, and then graduation on the 30th. Middlesex is doing a hybrid model, maybe for their day students, I'm not sure, but first day of school, September 8th, and then you can see all the way through December remote, virtual, students arrive, on-campus classes resume, spring break indeed, similar to some of the others, and graduation. And then included one more from Massachusetts. Again, started a week later than us, online in December as well. A resumption of classes similar to when we are. Boarding school students return in the little past the middle of January. Spring break there, looks like about 3 weeks. Graduation, same date as our new date. We also looked at, I didn't want to go through more and more, get a little tiresome, but examined schedules of 5 New Hampshire competitor schools, 2 in Connecticut for a similar comparison. So 16 total, 17 if Cushing's included in that data set. Just to, again, give us another piece of information as we looked towards making our decision, and did we want to make an adjustment or not. And really some of the observation and drivers for change were, average number of in-person classes, number of in-person weeks, I should say, on campus was 11 weeks, and ours was 13. And based on feedback, as I said, this was pretty long. All plan a return to class between the 4th and the 25th. Our original plan was the 14th, maybe March 8th, and now we're looking at February 1st with that return Thursday, Friday before. 5 out of the 16 schools planned no spring break. We thought, that would just be too long, especially, coming out of the winter and into the spring. Most are around 2 weeks. A couple were that 3. So our plan now is the 19th to the 5th with a return, as we said, on the 1st of April, that Thursday, Friday. All but one are remote in December. So, certainly in line there. 12 out of the 16 plan a graduation in May. looking at sort of, we started, as I said, the year with that 36 weeks of school to give us flexibility. Looking at planning the spring, I think we can bring it down to more similar to what we had before. And then we also have those days that we would have, like I said, would have had off a couple days after family weekend, a long weekend in October, a long weekend in February. Sort of, we have those a day here, a day there that not able to do during this time. So those as well are days gained, and feel like we can drop that back to May 22nd. Also, feedback from current families, in addition to the length of the entire semester, is that people wanted to be on campus, and that students, even with cases raising in number, and the conversations that we had during that time, particularly families enrolled in academic support, international students, athletes. I mean, those groups make up most of our kids. Desired on-campus learning. So we also wanted to be able to try to create a plan to honor that if safe to do so. And also a March return, looking at that March 8th, would effectively cancel all winter sports, which we definitely didn't want to do if that was sort of where all of our competitor schools would be headed with spikes in cases. That would be a reality, but hopefully it's not. So we want to be able to preserve the ability to have winter sports and create at least a 7-week period on campus where hopefully we can do that. So if we weren't here, we wouldn't be able to adjust and do that. So it's another way to sort of maximize the student experience, is to at least do what we did in the fall and hopefully do more than that. But certainly that requires the cooperation of other schools and state and local agencies. Our production values going up as we're getting better and better at these webinars. But winter is coming, and with that, cases are continuing to raise. So given the context of that reality, how do we continue with our sort of methodical approach of safety, being able to try to preserve the online experience, but still have an environment where teachers can focus on teaching, can focus on learning. We can offer all of the wide variety of programs that we can, even though there is a global pandemic happening, because we want kids to continue being able to live here, being able to learn on the Cushing campus. And so, certainly that's going to require the same amount of work, if not more so, than it did in the fall. And so upcoming communication, you will see from beginning soon from our academic and student affairs office about in-person and remote learning. We will send that out and ask certainly folks to commit to being on campus. That's what we're encouraging. And if you'd like to attend as an online learner, we're going to ask folks to apply or petition for that and give reasoning why, and then we'll be in communication with what that means for the resumption of classes. Jennifer Viana, who's joined us tonight, will send a communication regarding athletics. You'll see a communication about the repopulation of campus from our health services department, COVID testing requirements, quarantine guidelines. You'll see information. International students will see information about coming, back to campus and what that looks like. Day students, our day student advisor will put something out. Student affairs will talk about residential life. So lots more information to come, and certainly our decisions will continue to evolve as needed. But did want to give you what our current thinking is, why we went with the plan that we did, what are the pieces of data that we were looking at to do so, how we're definitely trying to keep the student experience in mind, but also as we started the beginning of the fall and the beginning of the year with the goals of keeping our campus safe and healthy, creating a plan that will allow us to stay open given the realities around us, and protecting those who are the most vulnerable in our community. So looking forward, timeline, tonight is our fall webinar, third one of the fall semester. And then we have December 18th is the end of our first Winterim session. January 6th, we'll come back for the second Winterim to begin. And we will do another webinar, spring webinar number 1, January 14th. And then hopefully we'll have even more details and information. And by then you'll know sort of how arrival is going to work and what all the different aspects of the next semester will entail. I always end with this because certainly opening isn't going and hasn't been an event, but it will be a process, and that process will continue to evolve and unfold and in new ways for all of us. I've appreciated everyone's patience, flexibility. I know, families have had a number of challenges, not only with COVID-19 in their personal lives, but also with schooling, and then all of the experiences and activities and sports that go with that. Have certainly been frustrating at varying levels for all of our families. So I want to say that I certainly empathize with you, and we are doing our best to meet the needs of all of our students. What I'll do is I'll ask our panelists to turn their video on. I'm going to pick a few questions from our pre-submitted questions, and then certainly I encourage everyone to use the question and answer function in the Zoom screen. You can see that probably at the bottom of your screen. Submit those questions. We'll do our best to answer them. But I'll first go to Jen Viana. There's a large number of questions here about athletics, some about hockey, some about basketball, sort of all with the theme of what's the plan? Is it going to happen? So I'll let Jen take that, and then I'll certainly add to that if I can help. Jen, do you want to take that first question?
Everyone, thank you
You're
for
on
being
mute.
here tonight. Oh, am I? I'm on mute?
Can't hear you.
Really?
You can?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Welcome everybody, nice to be here tonight. So I do have a little bit of information. One being that the good news is that we're looking to come back at the end of January. So that's the first part, is that we would actually be here, hopefully on campus here, which does allow us to potentially have a winter season. The second is that we need to have opponents. And the third is that we're looking to create a schedule. So I have been regularly talking to athletics directors, what I would describe in two sort of groups or two smaller pods. These are schools that have similar testing protocols that we do. And they're at this point willing to play. We're all at the table, we're all having conversations about it. So I'm hopeful, but I'm also realistic about where we are with the COVID rates. Just a couple weeks ago, and I believe Dr. Burton sent this information out to you about our varsity boys basketball team, which was scheduled to play out at Williston. And we met all of the criteria. We had all of our players get COVID tested, and our coaches, we expedited the results. And literally up until the last minute before we were going to leave campus, Williston was, they did cancel the games. They didn't have all their test results and for other reasons, but unfortunately those games were canceled. So I am hopeful that we'll be able to have games, but like I said, I am realistic of where we are with COVID rates. So we are actively talking to schools. We're excited that some of these schools are at the table and having these conversations. And like I said, most importantly, we want to keep our students safe. So we are requiring that these schools have similar testing protocols.
Yeah. And Jen, one of the things, and I know we'll communicate this out, but one of the guidelines now that we have to follow for Massachusetts is that we only play in Massachusetts. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the travel ban is we cannot play other schools outside of Massachusetts. You can actually get fined for it. So we would be looking to play schools within Massachusetts.
Right. And so that pool of schools certainly is boarding schools in Massachusetts, some of whom that I mentioned earlier tonight that you're speaking with.
Yep.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure those rules will continue to evolve as we continue throughout the next few days, weeks, and months.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just go to a few of these other questions, mostly sports. There's another theme of questions about restrictions. Will students be living the same way they did in the fall? In looking at the way that we operated and looking at and talking with other heads of school, the ways that other boarding schools have operated and thinking about the number of cases, we're certainly going to start that way. I mean, it's our goal and has been from the beginning that we need to sort of establish a baseline at the beginning and have restrictions. And, we did loosen those in the fall, and we're not able to increase those sort of loosening of restrictions as we progressed because the public health situation had deteriorated. And certainly as treatments get better, as potential vaccines come out, as the rest of 2021 begins to unfold, certainly we hope we can move that switch. And if, again, as governments become, as I said, a little bit more risk tolerant and agencies better understand COVID, I think it will certainly change. We're having conversations about residential life. We're having conversations about being on campus, but certainly the big things will not change. Everyone will be in masks. We still will need to do physical distancing. Room capacity will still need to be adhered to. We're going to have good viral mitigation strategy on campus, but definitely are working hard to have the best student experience possible. Josh, question for you here about roommates. And I know we don't have a definitive answer, but you give us a little sort of snippet into that.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. As Dr. Burton stated, we don't have a definitive answer today, but we are advocating and we are working with our medical team based on feedback we've collected from students and feedback that we've collected from families, and just thinking about what is best for boarding schools. But also, balancing some of the realities that Dr. Burton has spoken to tonight, just in terms of, viral mitigation strategies and just thinking about some of those other steps. So having roommates is a part of the conversation, and we'll have a better picture and a better understanding if we are able to move forward with that when we come back in January. And if we are able to move down that trajectory, we will be sure to reach out and make sure that we have a very clear and focused plan to think about what roommates would look like. And also, we do have some singles on campus as well, to make sure that we are kind of providing, the options that we can provide as we can provide those.
Thank you. There's a question about internet. So you can certainly use that same contact information. And if you want to contact me offline, I'd be happy to give you that information and work with you. But it certainly is the same as we shared in the summer. Question here, do Bermudian students qualify as domestic for the purposes of quarantine? We are following the Massachusetts guidelines. So that those change from time to time. I'm not familiar right this second about Bermuda and how Bermudians are treated coming into Massachusetts, but certainly can get you that information and share that. So a lot of repeat questions. What are the plans for bringing parents to campus for graduation? Still a long ways out. I mean, we are obviously hoping to have an on-person graduation, and one of the pieces we built into the calendar was trying to reduce our campus as much as possible to make sure we could have seniors not only on campus but celebrated for the normal sort of ceremonies and rites of passage that they have at the end of a high school career, and then being able to bring families to campus. Who knows if we'll be able to do that? I mean, that really falls under state guideline for gatherings and our ability to do that. But our plan is to attempt to do that to the best of our ability, similar to everything else we're talking about, the athletic schedule. And just so much is unknown that we can't really say one way or another what's going to happen there, but that we are aiming to do so, and that's our goal. Is it possible for international students to come back to campus? Absolutely, and we encourage students to make plans to come back to campus. There are some countries which still can't enter the U.S. without a 2-week quarantine in an intermediary country. I know some of our families are actually going through that process and working with companies that are now facilitating that process. So I would encourage you to work with your local government, check out U.S. State Department sites, and we will assist in that process certainly as well, but it's different for every country. Let's go to the Q&A that we have here. Raja, college counseling, will that proceed normally is the question, no matter sort of what happens?
Yes, absolutely. The College Counseling Office is getting ready to conduct their first round of meetings with the junior class early next week, middle next week, where they'll start to get a sense of who their college counselor is, and then the rollout, so it sort of transitions from seniors to juniors, and then the ways in which they work with sophomores and freshmen through connections will proceed as usual. And we have the benefit of having sort of undergone that experience last spring in terms of that rollout. And so Emily Roller and her team have made some tweaks, but they are well prepared to make sure that we are on board with all those timelines that are so important.
Great. Question also about vaccines. Will vaccines be mandatory on campus? Certainly, one part of the vaccine, which probably isn't publicized so much, is that it hasn't been studied in children, right? So anyone who's vaccinated, it wouldn't be available for anyone under 18. So as they're talking about rolling out the vaccine in the next several months, one piece to remember is that it won't be available for the pediatric population. And in talking with our medical team, we have 2 pediatricians on the team. One general pediatrics, the other is a specialist in pediatric infectious disease and immunology. I was actually just talking with her today about this. She said, summer to late 2021, and that studies on the pediatric population with vaccine are just starting now. So that any rollout of the vaccine would be for an 18 and over population. So just as you think about that and consider it, certainly we wouldn't be able to make it mandatory, at least at the beginning. Question about domestic students quarantining. We'll share that information from our health services. It will depend on a lot of factors, such as where you're coming from, how you're traveling. Josh, anything to add to that we did in the summer?
No, I think I know Elise Lewis will be sending out a letter shortly. And I would anticipate much of the information to be the same in terms of expectations, thinking about that quiet period and just really just how to set up a successful year.
Great, thank you. One question, the weekend that we're coming back in the spring is Easter weekend. Was that considered? Definitely, certainly always in our calendar and planning process. It just felt like the right time to come back, given all of the other pieces lining up: athletics, student activities, experience, when spring break would be, when we could come back. And certainly we don't usually have a big departure on an Easter weekend. So it felt like, if we needed to, for religious reasons, have someone on board at a different time, we'd be able to accommodate that. International students, Josh, for spring break, saying that will it be enough time to quarantine just in that 2-week period?
Yeah. For international students, especially for that spring break time, our plan currently is to have our dorms remain open. And then once we start to get a sense of who is able to return and who we do have on campus, we'll be able to work with those students. We'll be able to work with those families to provide a space so students would not necessarily have to return to their home country or even really leave the state of Massachusetts if they choose not to. So again, right, as we're just kind of thinking about this metered approach, once we have a sense of the students who we have on campus, we can then be actively working with those students to come up with a homestay type experience, obviously on campus, to support them during this time.
Great. And a similar question for domestic students, Josh. I think the 2-week spring break, obviously if you're leaving for 2 weeks, you can't quarantine for 2 weeks before you come back. So again, we're asking folks to just really shrink that social bubble, even though it's a break, that be careful who you're interacting with.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And like, I saw some guidance, guidance is always changing as well. So between here and March is always a great distance. And, we are hopeful that things start to start to trend in some positive ways in the new year.
Yeah. And the comment at the end of that question was, it doesn't sound like much of a break if that's what you have to do. And certainly we took that into consideration, which is why we did the 13 weeks in a row in the fall. But in talking to families, it was just that I, want to go home, want to hug my parents, want to, see the dog, want to see my siblings, whatever it might be. It might be that much of a break that's needed. So. Are we planning in-person graduation? We certainly are, as I said, and we're also planning for contingencies. We're planning for every possibility as we continue throughout the year, but are hopeful and are also planning for an in-person possibility. Roommates, we already answered that. Question about Easter, answered that. What will tuition and board fee adjustment be if students and families choose to continue being online? We'll have the same reduction that we did in the fall, which was about an $8K reduction to that fee. So if you have questions, once you fill out that form online, we'll definitely be in touch with details. Josh, will reentry look like it did in August?
As of today, yes. We are planning a very similar reentry. There seemed to be a lot of success around how we onboarded and were able to welcome our students back to campus. We are also we have now a lived experience, and so while we do anticipate there to be a quarantine on campus, very similar to what we had back in August. We are soliciting feedback from our dorm parents. We are soliciting feedback, for those who live the experience, knowing what it is, and just to make sure that we are providing, our meals are on time, our meals are warm, and students are also, having the best experience that they can as we work through that quarantine period.
Great, thank you. Similar question. So mark that one as answered. With the idea that parents might have to travel or ensure contingencies. Next question. So basically, there's not a chance that these kids will have a roommate. Josh, you want to take that again?
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to answer that question tonight, unfortunately. Again, we are advocating, we are working with our medical team, to see what we are able to do, and then once we have more information, in the new year, also having a sense of who is on campus, I think we'll be more prepared to answer that question with more of a concrete answer.
Yeah, I mean, we're encouraging as many students to come back as possible, so it may, from a practicality standpoint, be a reality that's going to have to happen. And so, we are advocating with our team that we need to plan for that possibility and encourage it as a likelihood. But, we are facing a different reality with, as I said before, with 56 days before, coming into the fall, we had 174 cases, tonight 6,800, and although hospitalizations and death rates weren't what they were in the spring, at the same time, we're not coming in at a low point. We're sort of coming in hot to a different environment, in February, and hopefully cases decrease by then, and then hopefully we even understand more and treatments are better, and there's a vaccine round that's out, and who knows how that'll impact overall attitudes and regulations. So it is an evolving conversation. We are constantly advocating not only for roommates but every portion of the student experience to be restored. So definitely ask for your continued partnership in that. We are doing the best we can there. Situation with day students. Again, I'm assuming same as fall. Our goal is to begin the year as much of a community or as large a community as possible. So which just does include day students. International students, we already answered a similar question. Josh, you want to talk about what a typical weekend looked like in the fall? I think this is a parent of a student who was remote in the fall and hopefully coming back in the spring.
Yeah, as Dr. Burton has spoken about, we tried to recreate as many options that our students are accustomed to in the fall. Unfortunately, we were not really able to move off campus. But in the fall, really what we had focused on was how our students gather and opportunities for our students to gather. So we had many outdoor movies. We had many outdoor activities. We had started to purchase. I think we ended up with about 50 to 75 Adirondack chairs that started to have some nice, just little social time or a congregation on campus, outside of campus. As the weather started to get a little cooler, we also started to focus a lot on kind of like fire pits, which also provided a nice source of heat at night for those Adirondack chairs. And we, some other things is that our student activities director, Donnie Connors, worked tremendously hard to think about activities for students, whether that be Waddle Wars, which was a variation of what we call our Dorm Olympics, which are still providing competition in students, still creating some dorm pride, and ultimately some school pride as well. And we're able to create ways to even bring, I know students on the weekends love to have a Dunkin' Donuts shuttle, or even some local delivery options, whether that be through Brothers Pizza, Village Pizza, or even Yakisawa, one of the local sushi places. We had tried to recreate the experience as much as we could, given some of the restrictions, given some of the social restrictions, and just some of those larger expectations. And obviously we will continue to do that as we move through, January, March, and even after spring break.
Josh, I would even add that we've had the fitness center open, we've had the strength room open, we've also had the Watkins Fieldhouse Gymnasium open, so the kids can go in there and shoot around, and we've also had the Iorio Arena open, so the kids can go and have free skate. Also had some open skate times and open gym times through student activities as well. I think the kids really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. Raj, a question for you. There's the new schedule. How does it impact academic grading, or does it?
So the only thing that really shifted was just the ever so slightly the true end of the fall semester, and then when that slate gets cleaned and then the spring semester begins. And so for the majority of students who are taking year-long classes, they will end up with just a single year-long grade that shows up on their transcripts, which is the norm at Cushing. Otherwise, that division really is a little bit more specific to seminars, those that some seniors and other upperclassmen take. So one of our priorities, as many of you have heard me speak about before, was the continuity of learning. And so we've really kind of made that the priority in terms of how we've approached learning throughout the year. And then we've worked within the other circumstances and parameters to find the right dates to really sort of put stop and ending points, that bracket, the way report cards come out, but even then we've had weekly updates the entire time. So for all practical purposes, it should be very, very smooth and felt minimally by students.
Great, thank you. An attendee is asking, we want our child to be home for Easter. What will be the policy? Josh, we created entrances and exits for family commitments.
Yes, there were family commitments that obviously arose in the fall, and we worked with families to support those the best we could. And we work closely with our health services department, who also, again, is partnering with our medical team. And if family commitments such as Easter or something else arises, It was typically, depending on the size of depending on how much time off campus, depending on the size of the gathering, students could expect to have some sort of 7 to 14 day on-campus quarantine with also various testing points in there. And it was something that, some families did take advantage of. And, we had also had really worked, to also, make sure that students are getting some care, that, that they are also going through that quarantine period. But, there was a very strict quarantine period when a student was entering campus and leaving campus mid-semester or off cycle.
And that's related to a question about international students allowed to arrive, at another time, say, if they're not able to enter the US at the beginning, but can after spring break, would we work with families to do that?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have the flexibility to be able to do that and create multiple entry points, particularly when our entire community is coming in.
Right. And I think, to that point too, right, there's a lot of outside of our control, just in terms of travel restrictions and such. And, we do know that some families, it is those travel restrictions that are keeping them in a position where they're unable to return. If situations change, we, as we have done since March now, we will continue to adapt, and we will continue to, provide an on-campus experience to the best of our abilities.
Yeah, thank you. Question says, I'm in California, but a Chinese student. How do I quarantine? You would quarantine as you're coming from California. So we would work with you and look at current guidelines that Massachusetts has for travelers coming from California and work with you in that way. Josh, a question, and you hit on it earlier. How do you make sure food delivery during the quarantine is a better experience than it was in the fall? Certainly, I can say, in the fall, it was our first lived experience through school in a pandemic, and sort of round two definitely took a lot of lessons from that. But I'll let you touch on some of the details there.
Yeah, thank you. We are working closely with our food service provider, Brock. And again, right, with that lived experience, we are just thinking about how to, best deliver meals in mass quantity, and also just to make sure that there are some good options. One of the things that we had really realized last time, as we had worked through this in our for the first time, was that we had an ordering system that was ultimately online, and one of the major hiccups that we ran into is that some students were not ordering by the deadline, and as students were not ordering by the deadline, we are thinking about better ways to make this more efficient. We are thinking about better ways, to make sure that we have more, for lack of a better term, compliance in terms of that, ordering system. But also looking at ways too to make sure that we are delivering meals as quick and as efficiently as we possibly can, given just the physical size of our dorms and also the population. Right. I think about some of our dorms, there are 3 to 4 floors. And when you receive 45 to 50 meals at once, delivering, just working through that, we are doing the best we can, given what we now understand, and how to just be a little bit more prepared moving forward.
And that quicker turnaround testing time is going to be key, because it won't be that 3 or 4 day period you had in the fall.
Exactly.
Jen, question, there's been a lot of discussion about basketball, hockey, etc. What about a sport like golf where you can socially distance while playing?
Sure. So I think about cross country, which is also a socially distant sport, and they didn't have any meets this fall. So then if we move forward to the winter, if we have it and teams are able to go on transportation, I can't see why we wouldn't have golf. Of course, we have to see where we are with COVID. But of course, we do play off site, and that would require transportation. So that may or may not be a challenge, but I'm certainly hopeful that we have it in the spring.
Yeah, one of the things that ends up being a challenge with athletics is the getting to and from, right? The transportation and the guidelines that we have upon the state of just how many people in a vehicle, what that looks like, windows open, things like that.
Mhm.
Josh, international students coming to campus for the first time, how will dorms be allocated? Will we still be doing waddles?
Yes. I think one of the positive things I think has come out of trying to look for a silver lining, and I think one of the positive things that has come out of this experience is this concept of waddles, which I think is something that will be remaining at Cushing for a while. And so one of the things that will be happening probably in the next 24 to 36 hours is that families will receive a communication most likely from the Student Affairs Office, and I think Dr. Burton has been speaking about this a little bit earlier, and it's going to be a form that ultimately comes out, a form and a letter that comes out from myself and Rajabala, asking families to kind of state their intention and try to give us some insight into what your thinking is in terms of your return to campus. And then once we have that information and once we have a sense of who is able to return, which we hope to have an increase from the fall, we will then be working with those families who are able to return to think about where students were living, but also how to add additional students to our campus. And so once we are able to just get that larger sense and get that larger understanding, some of that crystal ball starts to become a little clearer for us, and we're able to start to move in ways that we can be thoughtful and we can be intentional about the placements as we understand and based on those recommendations from our medical team.
Great, thank you. Question, is the school looking into the ability to get rapid tests on hand for campus testing? We actually had rapid tests all through the fall for testing. The sort of difficulty with the rapid test is that's for symptomatic individuals, and that oftentimes the antigen rapid test is not as reliable for the asymptomatic positive person, is that it's picking up people who are shedding the virus once they're contagious, not where the PCR test will pick it up if someone is an asymptomatic positive. So we do have something, it's a brand name called the Veritor. We use it on campus. It's an antigen test in our health services department with Elise Lewis, our nurse practitioner, Dr. Muchler, our physician, and we're able to use it a number of times to help rule out people that were symptomatic who had a fever, cough, other symptoms that ended up just being a cold. Given this is back to testing, given the rising numbers in COVID, I suspect there was an impact on testing demand and the timing of results during August return. It was Thursday to Monday, which was a very long time. Is a consideration being made? Yes, we're using a different vendor. Turnaround times have been anywhere from actually 14 to 30 hours. Those companies have significantly improved not only their turnaround time, but their ability to absorb that increased demand. We're working with the Broad Institute. We're looking at labs with the University of Minnesota. We're looking at a provider that works with the SUNY system in New York, sort of to have an A, B, and C contingency plan, but definitely do anticipate a much, much shorter quarantine time in the spring or beginning of Winterim 3, Raja, right? Turnaround. Great. A lot of repeat questions. Josh, talk a little bit about, and I know it'll take some creative planning still, but some of the conversations that have evolved around student activities, not having the turf available, particularly in the snow, and what current thinking is as we move towards the especially the winter portion of the spring semester.
Sure. Yeah. No. That has been a pressing topic of conversation, and I know something that it's our student activities director Donnie Connors is coming up with ideas daily. And we are looking for ways to realize that in the winter we'll be cold. In the winter, well, maybe it should be cold, right? But if you're in Massachusetts today and it's just unseasonably warm, but right, we aren't, we are anticipating that snow. We are anticipating, kind of what winter has been in the past, and we're thinking about how to best use some of those fire pits and other opportunities that we had, but also starting to come up with proposals on what a student center could look like. If we are able to go down that way, or just what we're also thinking about socialization, and just how to provide spaces for socialization, knowing that weather will impact those, this is something that will continue to evolve. And I also know that we are working with some of our student leaders to solicit their ideas as well, to be constantly thinking, to be constantly responsive, but also to I think just to be just mindful of the expectations that we are also expected to meet as well.
Great, thank you. Will athletes be able to leave for club sports on weekends? Girls hockey for this age had to move state tournaments to March. National championships hosted by USA are in April, and USA Hockey is currently planning to have them. I would say, up in the air. I would say, at this point, given if it was the decision had to be made today, it would be a no. But certainly things will evolve. I mean, we're talking about re-entering school at a time when we have the most cases that we've had. And so as state agencies and as I said earlier, have increased risk tolerance as treatments get better, maybe by that time, if it's March and April, there's a vaccine rollout that has an impact on cases. There's just so much that's unknown, or even if those things happen, as I said, New Jersey and Arizona today dialed those things back because Arizona became a tournament destination. They were hosting tournaments where people were flying there to participate in events. So, I would say that's too far away. If the decision had to be made today, we wouldn't be able to do it, but who knows? By then, testing may even get better and better. There could be other factors that could improve our ability to do that. We are advocating always to do anything that our kids want to do to sort of bring them back to a place of normalcy, but it's just too far away to really know the answer to that. I know it's getting late. It's 8:20, and we usually try to keep everyone on here for an hour. There's a couple of questions about international students, F1 visas. We're going to be sending a communication soon, I would say within a week, to international students about travel. We offer a sister program in China that some of our international students participated in for in-person learning this last fall, which we'll continue to do. Some families, particularly our Chinese families, are looking at staying in an intermediary country for a couple of weeks. Certainly that's a possibility. So we'll try to answer all of those questions directly to our international students in a communication during that time. But I think we'll skip those. It's about our APs. Do we have answers on, are those going to take place as normal? Will they be similar to last year? Do we know?
Unfortunately, those are all unknowns, but the plans that do exist are for a more traditional examination period, where they're set on certain days, but the College Board will continue to amend its planning based on what's available, what schools are doing in terms of on-campus learning, and they showed actually a kind of impressive amount of flexibility last year in their ability to provide testing opportunities. So they remain committed, as do we, to making sure that students have the opportunity to finish those placement tests for the classes that they've been working in. But there are still, like with so many other aspects of things we've talked about tonight, variables that will determine the final shape of what that looks like. We are, now that we have a sense of what our plans at Cushing look like, we are making active plans to be able to become a closed testing center to be able to host the SAT and the ACT on campus this spring. Again, the College Board and the ACT are slowly unfolding, unveiling dates of what their options will be, and so we're trying to find the ones that align best with our repopulation plans. But we remain committed to being able to provide those opportunities, and that's been a priority of the college counseling. And going back to that original question about the ways in which that they work with students, making sure that it's a term that has completely different meaning in nowadays, but that testing strategies are still in line with deadlines and plannings and everything that needs to lead into the scaffolded college application process.
And similar question, Raja, is a sophomore international student who was not able to sit for the PSAT in the fall because they were remote. I know we offered it here, but they weren't here. If they're coming back in the spring, is that a possibility?
I am not. Our plans have always revolved around hosting the PSAT in the fall on campus, so there would still be the opportunity for a rising 11th grader to be able to do that again next fall. But we can look into what opportunities exist in terms of spring opportunities as well.
Great. And Jen, I'll end one last question with you from a current student on how are colleges adjusting to obviously their recruitment process for athletics, right? Having the need to adjust for students who aren't able to get the exposure. So what have you been hearing for how those coaches and programs are adjusting?
Sure. I think one thing that will be really huge is live stream, which we were able to do in the fall for our varsity programs. The kids were able to take some of those video clips and make highlight videos. And I think the student athletes have to advocate for themselves and introduce themselves to college coaches, and also use their current coaches here at Cushing, who are very connected and network with other coaches to be able to help them find some schools, as well as the college counseling office as well. So certainly live stream. Hopefully we get to a point where we're allowed to have college coaches on campus. Of course, that's the best way, where they can see you live.
Great. Well, certainly I encourage everyone, if you didn't get your question answered, we got through 90% of them plus, but if you have one that we didn't get to, I think the remaining ones are repeat questions or repeating on themes that we've talked about. Please feel free to reach out to any of us or anyone else who can answer those directly in the offices here at school, and we'll be happy to get back to you. Certainly our offices are open throughout this Winterim period, so you can get in touch with any of us. And thank you again for joining us. If I don't speak with you, please have a safe, happy, and healthy holiday season. And we will be in touch with various communications pretty regularly up until students return at the end of January. So thank you to our panelists. Thanks for taking your time tonight and joining us. Thank you for all our participants. I appreciate everyone joining us, and look forward to talking again soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.